In this session, this is sort of the part two of the idea validation. Uh, we will talk about a little bit on company formation, not a whole lot because there's a lot of information available. And at your level right now, those details may not be very relevant. Organizing finance, founders agreement, team formation, and few other things that are very important and often enough inexperienced founder, independent of the age, sometimes do face some difficulties in trying to go through some of these issues. Let's look at the ecosystem for entrepreneurs. We've talked about it before, but let's just recalibrate ourselves or recap on all of these. People, very important. People are, the key, as I may have said before. Investors invest in people before the idea. Smart founders, not so good idea versus bright idea but not so good founders. Are not impressive. You're not impressed as an investor. Often enough, the people will pass the second one but might consider the first one, where you have smart founders but not so, because they know how to make good of many of these things. So it's important to understand people are very important. Funds are important. Whether how do you generate the funds is important. Sometimes we get stuck up on equity and investors and all that, but fund, there are multiple ways to develop the fund. You finally are building a product or a service or a solution, and for which there needs to be a market, or you need to create a market. I would not say that very often many people, including investors, founders, advisors, get stuck when there is a disruptive idea and market not visible. They might rather kill the idea. But if you look at Silicon Valley, one of the things they've done very well is they can spot if an idea has a future in terms of creating a market. And many of the big giants that you see today, probably the market didn't exist. They created the market. So do not hesitate from pursuing an idea whose market is not there. Obviously, you need to take a lot more steps, but it's important to have a market from where you will send. The fourth one, I must say, is the government. And let me sort of go through each one of them. The people, idea, team, advisors, very important, mentors, and the services that you need in the beginning. Are you going to generate internal funds? That means not putting your own money. That makes you an angel investor, but company builds a product or a solution, it sells it, and it generates money. That is an internal funding of the company. Equity, that means you share ownership of the company in lieu of money that people are bringing in. Now, that could be angel investors, yourself, your friend, founder, some high net worth individuals who, in the beginning, take the highest risk and give you some money to get yourself started. Venture capital, right from very early stage all the way to growth stage to taking you to an IPO. Venture capital is very important. It takes different shapes and forms. Strategic investment, very often first-time founders do not understand that a large corporation investing versus a venture capital investing are two different things. If you're, for example, in a internet search space and Google comes in and wants to invest, that would be a strategic investor. But ABC Capital, which is a financial company, would be investing, would be equivalent of an equity capital. And debt, you can borrow money, but then you're liable to pay it back as per the terms and conditions. Important thing is equity means if the company does not succeed, investors take equal amount of risk broadly. There may be agreements where different people take different risk, but broadly that's if it goes down, you're not liable to pay that money back, because that's the risk they're taking. But the reward is that if the company does very well, their money multiplies by not just tens but hundreds, and that's the equity capital. Debt is a money that you borrow from wherever, which you're liable to pay back. And if you cannot pay back, there might be regulations and all other conditions that might come in. While equity, you dilute the ownership of the company to share the risk. In case of debt, you do not dilute anything, but then you are liable to pay the money back. So if you do well, both of them are fine. But if you do not do well, in that case you're liable for the debt. So it's very important to understand, and all these funds are available at different stages. It is important for the founding team to understand where the money is coming from and how to make sure that um, the funds are available. And I've said in my one of my previous classes, one of the responsibilities of the founder to make sure that resources are available to build and grow the company. Market is consists it's a basket of customers with similar requirement. Then you have channels. We will talk about channels. How does you go to your customer? Channels are important. You operate in different geographies, you operate in different business areas, industry areas, technology areas. For example, you are a security product company, you operate in Far East, you operate in North America, your business is currently focusing on India, so on and so forth. You're a fintech company, edutech company, those are all verticals. You could be a entrepreneur that provides a solution to a broader set of you know companies, consumers, in multiple geographies with multiple types. Then you're a company that can service a larger basket or larger market. Having said that, then there are other issues come up. So all of these are very important. Government is an important factor in every startup. Governments can be regulators, and a regulation either can open up a market for you or throttle a market for you. Both things happen. And during our chat, I will come back with some examples where governments have been very, very active in some of these things. So, very important. Governments can provide incentives for a business or an industry to grow. I can give you an example. When the software industry started building up in the 80s, the TCS was there from 1968. So one of the, with few other companies was a lone warrior building software business, not just outside, but in India. But in the mid to late 80s, it occurred to the government that this is an industry that was growing, and some far-sighted, people in the government felt we need to give incentives. So what they did was, India was a regulated economy, and it was import licensing, and licensing was a major issue. So they created Software Technology Parks of India, STPIs. An STPI was a single window clearance for all your needs. So if you can create an export unit under STPI, life became a lot easier. Also, another thing the government gave us a major tax holiday on your export earnings. Government did not lay taxes, and so you had tax-free regime for a long period of time. It was a time of scarce foreign exchange resources, so you could borrow or you could buy equipment, capital, software in foreign currency against your export earnings, and for which you did not, and if you were in one of the export zones, you did not pay any duty. So a lot of these incentives came from where the industry grew. So governments can be regulatory incentives, government can be a major customer, and it is important to understand that governments are a major customer, but it takes time to build them up. There is a general misconception that government means corruption. It is not true. Yes, these kind of complexities exist in every market with large set of potential customers. But as entrepreneurs, you need to find a way to do that. Might give you a small 10-minute or 15-minute on ethics, and we will talk about some of these things there. And government itself is a market. They are so big. You take the smallest country and its government, you will find as an entrepreneur that's a significant market. But when to enter, how to enter, what to do, these are all complexities that we need to, but the returns can be equally good. So if your investment is deep, your rewards are also big. So that is what is coming. So that's the ecosystem of entrepreneurs. And at the core of it is founders, and that apple is our idea or the opportunity. Let's look at the finance. I talked about internal equity. We talked about angel, venture capital, strategic investment from large companies that may have interest in your business, either to take your solution and to the market through white labeling, or they may have interest in in that area. They might end up taking a stake and then finally acquire you. All of those are possible. And then there is debt. uh, Advances or early stage, you may not have a full product, but the companies might give you some money, saying that if you deliver this to me, this becomes my payment for your product or your service. That makes sense. You may have a minimum value offering, as we have talked about, and they'll pay for that. So that is, and if that creates additional resources, financial resources, that could be your internal funding, share of the company we've talked about, and a loan. So all of these are possible. Let's look at building the team. You have idea, you have team, and then I'm talking about people from outside the world who are advisors or your mentors that you bring in on a temporary basis to help you sort out many of the things with your business. So top team is very important. It sets the DNA, the tempo, the ways of working, the character, the culture, everything about the company comes from founders and the top team. And we have talked about it. The founder's responsibility is very, very important. Chief Executive Officer, the person who is responsible for running the business. Chief Technology Officer, that's the technology face of the company in terms of technology strategy, technology, understanding what products to build. In case of a service company which is focused, Chief CTO has a role to say this is the area in which we offer these things. Principal scientist, head of the R&D. This is different than chief technology officer. Many times people confuse between head of the R&D as technology officer. CTO is an outbound, outside in role. Head of the R&D often can be internal, but I must also mention here that all C-level senior officers have cross-border, cross-functional responsibility to be able to represent the company on any forum, along with the CEO. Very often founders make this mistake, and I've spoken before that my job is engineering and his job is so-and-so, or her job is so-and-so. That's not the way. Founding team, core team must be able to articulate on anything. Vice president sales. I've talked about vice, but you can call it head of sales. Person who's responsible for closing sales. And we will talk about, when we talk about scaling, we'll talk about sales in much more detail. Head of engineering. There's a difference between head of R&D and head of engineering. Head of engineering or service delivery is the person who delivers the product that customers use. Head of R&D may create a prototype, create an idea, create a near ready product, may come up to many minimum value product, all of that. But it's the head of engineering who looks at it from all angles. You're all engineering students, I assume, and you need to understand what it means from taking from a lab idea to the finished product. That's the head of engineering. Financial officer, in the beginning, you may have someone who advises you and do your accounting. For example, in the very early stages of my company, we had my sister who was an accountant to come in just to put our expenses in a spreadsheet so that we knew what we were spending and what we were earning. And she continued to do that until we grew up to create an accounting department. So it could be simple. You may hire a CA, make sure that you have someone who is looking at your finances. Absolutely very critical. You may have more roles. I've just put it some critical roles. You may have a chief people's officer, people call it, chief vision officer. There are all kinds of roles that are possible. Vice president marketing, and it's important to build the core team. Other thing I might mention is founders have to build this team, including chief executive officer. If one of the founders takes the role of chief executive officer, make sure that that is the role that person is cut out to do, either for a long term or a short term. Do not hesitate to say we are the founding team, we are the founders, and we can run this company for next 2 years, after which we will hire a CEO who can take it from wherever we leave it to the next one. Or we are looking for a chief executive officer. We have the idea. In the founding team, we have a CTO, we have a principal scientist, and we have one of our friends who went and did an MBA finance as our CFO, but we need a chief executive officer. Nothing wrong in doing that. In fact, that is a sign of maturity. I would say 95% startups I have seen that have either struggled or not grown is because CEO who can build the business is not there, and founders do not recognize it, or they are too hesitant to let go of that role. I might say that your title as a founder or a co-founder, nobody takes it away from you. But your title as a C-level officer is dependent on what you deliver to the company. It's very, very important. You are interested in building the business around the idea that you came up with. And whosoever helps you to do that should be your approach. Okay. Mentors, sometimes advisors, they bring wisdom, they bring expertise, they bring subject matter knowledge, they bring presence in the ecosystem. So for example, you build a video conferencing tool, or you build a SaaS CRM tool, or you build a networking product, you build a new education curriculum. Now people who have a presence in the ecosystem of channels, sales, customers might bring that experience. Sometimes you need people to make sure that the compliance to the government regulations, sometimes they can be very complex in the industry that you're going to operate or operating on. They can also be sounding board. They can be emotional support. Very often the journey of a entrepreneur is ups and downs, and at that stage an emotional support is very important. At that stage you don't need only the expertise. I always say your grandmother could be your biggest emotional support. I'm just taking an example. Someone in the family, old enough that you can, feel comfortable with. It's very important to have. You maybe you're, one of the faculty members, maybe a senior from the college, from the school, your mother, cousin, a friend, anybody, or a professional mentor that you trust in, and who can give you both the emotional support as well as the knowledge of the startup. So it's very important to understand all of this. But key point is building the team in the early stages, and as long as you're involved in the company, continue to grow this business. We'll talk about scaling and we'll talk about teams there. But remember, founders take the responsibility to start and create the team that will take your idea to a successful company. Founders will play one or more roles, but must recognize when to bring in the right person of a job, including the CEO. That's what I mentioned. Exactly. That's exactly what I mentioned. This is one of the core issues in in startups, and it's good to recognize it upfront. Contribution from founders unequal. It happens. It can happen in the beginning. It can happen down the line. As the company scales up, the founders may have limited ability, and therefore their contribution, may be different. If founders join late, after significant groundwork is done, obviously, you know, their contribution as compared to the original founders important. Is founders' contribution unequal amount in the angel round? Somebody, you may have a co-founder who is who has some more resources. So when they bring in, how do you handle that? What if a founder leaves early? What happens to their stakeholder? And there could be many things. Sometimes what happens is 3 or 4 friends get together. A couple of them have a job. Somebody in Singapore, somebody in Bangalore, and you are doing your company from Pune. You're putting in all the effort, but these people are founder. They put in the angel. They put, let's say each one puts 20 lakhs, and you put a 60 lakhs up. And then you start. You're working, doing all the work, and you do significant amount of work. But these people have a job, and they are earning, and they have given to the company early capital, and they are doing a few. I'm not saying that they are not doing anything. They're doing everything. Is it a equal equity? Possibly no. All of these are important. So founders agreement, like hiring a CEO, another thing founders don't do. It is difficult. It is sometimes can be uncomfortable, but the fact that founders have come together, they are very close to each other and ready to jump into a risky venture, but getting that agreement in place is very, very important. All of this we've said. Many of these situations come which may require recalibration of stake, roles, and founders agreement is way to define and describe all such situations and determines founders stake and role in the company. So that's pretty much on few of the things. Beyond validating the idea, we'll now be moving into scaling case studies and everything else, finance and investment. But I think I have a feeling that you probably got a good idea on how do you take an idea and start putting the stuff around it to build it into a early stage startup while validating the idea and take it forward from there.